Sometimes You Can't Make It on Your Own, U2's hit single from 2004. This song means so much, we're ready to tap into it. We've got a great guest lined up from Spirit Music Group, Mr. Clay Hatton. This is going to be fun. Buckle up, stay tuned, we're ready to rock.
Welcome to the Song and Verse Podcast, a discovery of God's Word, one song and a few verses at a time. Here's your host, Rockin' Odd Todd.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Song and Verse Podcast. I am your host, Rockin' Odd Todd, and we are so happy that you've decided to join us today. U2 is one of those bands that I have loved for a long time. I think when I was in middle school, the Joshua Tree came out about that time, and you know, MTV was flooded with those three major songs. Still haven't found what I'm looking for. The Streets Have No Name and With or Without You. Those guys are phenomenal musicians that have figured out a way to, navigate the storms of music, so to speak. They found a way to be relevant even in a time when maybe their music wouldn't have fit. They found a way to make it work. And they're just really, really awesome to see how not only have they attached to their faith and kept it, but figured out a way to use it in a mainstream platform to be an inspiration to others. That's really kind of what we're going to be looking at today. And I've got Clay Hatton from Spirit Music Group to help me along today. Clay is a good friend, and he's actually on his way up in the music world as well. Not only is he a musician, but he's actually working his way up through the songwriting industry as well, and finding a way to work not only with copyright, but also with some of these songwriters.
And with that, we welcome Clay Hatton, our guest for this episode from Spirit Music Group. How's it going, Clay?
I'm doing great. How are you, Todd?
Oh, I'm great, man. I'm great. So you and I go back a little bit, but you've been in this position now with Spirit Music Group for almost a year. So tell us a little bit more about what you do there.
Yeah. So basically, right now, I'm an admin assistant at the company. There's about 8 of us that work there full time, and then we have about 20 to 22 songwriters as part of our publishing company. So songwriter moves to Nashville. At least in country music, that seems to be the case. A lot of songwriters tend to move to Nashville. They play in writers' rounds. So what a writers' round is they have little at bars across Nashville. There'll be 3 or 4 writers, and they'll play some of their original songs, and then co-write with a lot of writers in Nashville. And then over time, you start to build your reputation as a writer. And so a lot of these publishers will go to these writers' rounds and kind of scout different songwriters, and then over time, they'll build a relationship with the writers, and then that's how songwriters get a contract. So basically what I do on a day-to-day basis is new songs come in, and I enter, here are the 3 or 4 writers that contributed to the song, and it depends on what genre of music that it's in, but in country music, most of the time, royalties are split evenly. So if there's 2 writers, one writer's getting 50%, another writer's getting 50%. And then in most cases, publishers usually get half of that. So I'm in charge of just making sure that all of our data is entered correctly, making sure that writers are I'm a part of one massive chain of making sure that writers get paid correctly and by the right people. So that's kind of what I do on a day-to-day basis, a lot of data entry. And ultimately what a publishing company is just developing relationships with the people that you work with. So as a part of this quarantine and me working from home for the last 3 months, it's been tough because I don't get to see the people that I work with, the writers. They don't come into our buildings. So it's been a little bit difficult, but it's still a great job, and I love the people I work with.
That's great, man. So I was kind of looking over the website a little bit, and there's some pretty big songs, pretty top name songs that your companies work with. So it's not like it's a small group. You don't hear about some of these copywriters, companies, and stuff like that. Spirit Music Group. Like, where would we see that label or that title listed in like an album or something? Where would you see it?
Yeah, so Spirit's different. So there's record label side of the music business,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have publishing company side of the music business. So the publishers represent the songwriters behind the songs. The record companies represent the artists that ultimately record the songs, right? Usually on the back of CDs, and a lot of times you'll see in parentheses and kind of like the smaller print, it'll be like, here, there are 3 names. And usually those 3 or 4 names are the songwriters to the song.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you look up lyrics on Google or something like that, and you're like, I want to know the writers to this song. Even on Spotify now, which is super cool, Spotify and Apple Music, you can look up the songwriters to a song. In case you're curious.
Yeah. Well, and that happens quite a bit in Nashville too. I think a lot of people don't quite get it. And growing up, a lot of the bands I listened to, they wrote their own music, their own songs and stuff. And I think a lot of people may not recognize in country music or in Nashville in general, there's a lot of people writing songs and then people performing those songs.
Yeah. 100%.
And so there's a lot of artists that don't write their own stuff. Somebody else writes it for them.
Yeah, definitely. And in today's world, because, about 10, 15 years ago, illegal downloading was a big issue within the music business. And that's how a lot of money was being lost. And so, unfortunately, that's been able to get cleaned up in a lot of ways. Spotify and Pandora and, Apple Music have definitely been contributors to that, because they've provided legal ways of streaming music, whether you want to pay for a premium access where you don't have advertisements, or you just want to, pay with the or get it for free with advertisements. But all that being said, songwriters don't get paid very much at all from streaming services and whatnot, which has definitely been a battle over the last few years,
mm-hmm.
Between publishers and some of these streaming platforms. And so, yeah, that's kind of just a really interesting business. All that being said.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and one of those bands, like I was talking about, is U2 that, have written their own music forever. And, I think Bono writes a lot of their lyrics, but I think they all come together and write the music together. And that really kind of leads us into the song for this episode, which is Sometimes You Can't Make It on Your Own. And so, we could start the conversation off there a little bit. You were the one that really kind of wanted to talk about this. So I want to hear what that song really means to you, and then we can kind of go from there.
Well, so growing up as a kid, I always have like a vivid memory of VH1 Top 20 Countdown, which was a big deal about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, where there'd be music videos of the top 20 songs at the time. And I always have this vivid memory of seeing the Sometimes You Can't Make It on Your Own music video, where Bono is just walking down the street, and then all of a sudden he walks into this venue, and the rest of the band's there, and they perform the rest of the song. And it's this really cool, contrast in the song. Like the first half of the song is very mellow, and the verse, there's a really interesting contrast between the verse and the chorus, especially. And yeah, so it's always been a really interesting song to me, both from a production standpoint, from a sound standpoint, to how it speaks to me kind of on a spiritual level. I mean, I think the lyrics, Sometimes You Can't Make It on Your Own, just are so universal,
mm-hmm.
Whether that's spiritually or just, I need somebody in my life to help me get through it, and in the hard times and the good times. And that song has always just stuck out to me over the years, and it's one that I think will continue to stick out to me as I grow older too.
Well, and it's interesting because, to hear you speak from your side of it, you're listening also at the production value and all those good things that are in there as well, which, the average listener may not hear that when they listen. But you too, those guys have been around forever. I can't even remember. It was 1976 was when they first kind of formed together as the band Feedback. I think they also took the name The Hype before they actually ended up becoming U2. But those dudes have been together since before I was born. So
yeah, I know. Yeah. I didn't really grow up on U2.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't. It's literally this one song and a couple others. I guess like Vertigo was obviously a huge hit back in the day.
Yeah.
But this song, it's like, I don't know. I just didn't listen to a lot of U2. My dad played a lot of like Buddy Holly growing up, and a few Beatles songs and stuff like that. But this song, I think it's just because VH1 Countdown kind of
that's hilarious. That's really cool. Because I mean, U2 was still big then and still are big, but the Joshua Tree really kind of put them on the map.
Yeah.
That was I think it was 1986 album. I'm not exactly sure on my dates, but that's when I was watching MTV and VH1, and those are the videos that I remember. I still haven't found what I'm looking for, and they played that. They played that video so much that it's like I probably got the whole thing memorized if I really, went back and looked at it. And it's just interesting to me because U2 is one of those bands that, like you were saying, the narrative can touch all facets of your life, not just.
Absolutely.
In this song in particular, he was writing about his father, and his father, I think he had just been diagnosed with cancer. And I guess he had always seen his dad as one of these strong men that, never wanted anybody's help or was never really, a part of the picture. I don't want to speak too much about the story. I don't know it completely, but it sounds like the song was written about, hey, Dad, it's time to maybe ask for some help, or whatever.
Yeah.
And but there's also this underlying notion there of, as a Christian, we try to do so much without the help of the Holy Spirit or without, prayer or even without reading scripture. And it touches right on that as well as, sometimes you just need to pick up your Bible and ask for some help, or get on your knees and pray about, whatever it is you're going through. You were talking a little bit about Bono and the one quote that really kind of stuck out to me was his words where he says, "But with Christ we have access in a one-to-one relationship, for as in the Old Testament it was more one of worship and awe, a vertical relationship. The New Testament, on the other hand, we look across at a Jesus who looks familiar, horizontal. The combination is what makes the cross." And I'm like, for me, that's what this is all about. This is taking the religious aspect out of this and really looking at the relationship between us and our Creator, and Him sending His Son. So, and I know Bono's been pretty inspirational for you as well. So I wanted to kind of hear, what the things that he's done, mean to you as well.
Totally. I think U2 has been one of the most in my opinion, I think they're one of the most positively activist groups probably within the last 30 years. I was watching an interview the other day as I was trying to prepare for this, and there was this really good quote, and I have it written on this computer here, and it said, he says, "We don't have to please God in any other way, really, than to be brutally honest. That is the root, not just to a relationship with God, but it's the root to a great song." And I thought that was just like profound. I was like, again, it goes back to the fact that like humans are so stubborn in our imperfections that we just don't want to ask for help sometimes. And I think that quote really just stuck out to me because it's like, it goes back to the song. Like sometimes you just can't make it on your own. And if that's not being brutally honest, I don't know what is, because I think we all just, sometimes we need somebody else, and it takes us swallowing our own pride to just say, we're not strong enough to take care of this ourselves. We need somebody else. We need the Lord. We need, prayer, other people to lift us up, really.
Sure. And you and I, our relationship, it's kind of funny. We really, have only known each other for a couple years, and it's really only in a couple weeks time because of the camp that we work with.
Yeah.
And your father was an inspirational part of my life, and your mother.
Same here.
Yeah. And I can't imagine what life would have been like without Bruce as a counselor at camp,
Oh my gosh.
It's funny because it completely ties into what this song is all about, in the fact that I consider those people that I went to church camp with, annually for 1 week out of the year.
Yeah.
I consider those people to be some of the strongest parts of my faith and my walk with Christ,
Absolutely.
And they came from rural towns, metropolitan areas. They came from everywhere, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky. By the way, this is my Irish shirt for you.
Oh, that's unfortunate. I really figured you probably had something Kentucky on. And I was going to make a joke about it, but I'll hold it back.
Hey, well, it's the Irish for you too, though, at least, right? Okay.
Okay. Fair, fair.
So anyway, when it comes to people that you can lean on, when you share faith, it's so much easier. And I always think about camp when it comes to life, because if we could just live like we do at camp for one, on a daily basis like we do there, holy mackerel, what would life look like?
Oh my gosh.
I think the same family that I'm talking about is one you were raised with. And what's so cool about this is, your career is going straight into this music world. And your dad was a huge part of music for me, as far as picking up a guitar and starting to pick and grin a little bit. Your grandmother even was a huge part of music. And so I want to hear a little bit about the history of the Hattons.
Yeah.
What that means to you and your career and everything that you're doing now.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it all started with my grandmother's, I think it was her grandfather, was actually a professor of music at Northwestern up in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And then family came down to Southern Indiana. And then my grandmother's father was the preacher at the church I attend now. So the church is over 200 years old now. And so my grandmother grew up going there, and I think by the age of 5, she was already playing piano. And then, she passed away a couple of years ago, but she played piano for over 80 years, which is just incredible.
And she was a member of a band up there too, correct?
Yeah, I believe so. So we had, after my dad was born, my parents got married. They had a gospel crew called the Presbys.
Mm.
And so they still perform every now and then at our church between Christmas and during the spring. So usually like 2 or 3 times a year, they'll have about 4 songs that they'll perform at our little church of about 90 people in Vincennes, Indiana. But yeah, so my grandmother she would play piano for the group, and my uncle would play the banjo, my dad would play the guitar, they had a bassist. So really, my grandmother was kind of the catalyst for instilling music within our family. My uncle plays the banjo, guitar, my dad plays guitar, I play guitar. We just have a lot of musical. My sister sings, I sing, we all sing, which is super cool.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately that was kind of the first introduction to music in my life. I grew up taking piano lessons, I think starting at the age of 6. And, I think I stopped at about 4th or 5th grade. But yeah, that was really the kind of the beginning of my musical journey. And then, like you said, our faith family, a lot of it comes from Camp Pioka. And when I was in 7th grade, one of my counselors actually had a Dave Barnes song, who's a singer-songwriter here in Nashville, one of my favorites. I remember we were all in the cabin, and he played this song called Carry Me Through, which is actually a very, just a prayer, essentially, of, asking God to carry you through the hard times. And I just remember being like, who is this? Because I love the song. And that was really just another moment in time where I was like, oh my gosh, like, I love this music. And like, I'd never heard of a singer-songwriter like that before. I was like, the voice is great. Like, I love the sound of this. And I was like, how do I get into this? Like, this is what I want to be someday, or what I want to be involved with. And so, and this counselor had played guitar at campfires and all that. And I was like, oh, that's a Taylor guitar. Like, I got to have that guitar. So after freshman year, my parents got me a Taylor guitar for Christmas. And that was the first guitar I got. And that's the only guitar I have. And that guitar has carried a lot of songs that I've written in college and in high school and even now, which is pretty crazy to see how, things have transpired over the last 10 years of my life, and how God's been such a leader in all of that, and how he's placed certain people in my life, he's placed certain events, and, ultimately he's brought me down to Music City, which is crazy. And so I think, all that being said, really kind of what my purpose and mission is, and just, working in the music business now, it's just because it's been such a part of my family's life that it's almost an honorable thing to be able to work in music.
Mm-hmm.
And, someday when I have kids, hopefully I'll be able to instill kind of my love for music and my family's love for music into them, and they'll be able to pass it down. But yeah, that's kind of a long story short synopsis of kind of how my musical journey began and where it is now. It's crazy.
And that was the Lincolns you were talking about, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Counselors?
Jasper and Lincoln Smith. Yeah. Jasper was a counselor of mine.
Smith. Yeah. Jasper and Lincoln Smith. Right.
They were both just wonderful, wonderful counselors, and wonderful people.
And those guys are in Nashville too, right? They're in Nashville too.
Yeah, Jasper has actually joined Straight No Chaser, the a cappella group, and he's now they've kind of been on pause for a little bit just with the virus, but yeah, they're going on tour once everything opens back up, which is super exciting, I think, for Jasper, because he's just an incredible vocalist and somebody that I admire just a ton.
That's awesome. Yeah, and he comes from that whole line of camp too. I mean, that's
right.
It's so crazy how many people God has orchestrated into our lives through that place. And it had been years since I'd been back there, and I think this would have been my 4th year back had we gone. And what's so crazy about that place is you can spend years away, but when you go back there, the presence of the Lord is just alive and well in that place all the time. I mean, it's just phenomenal to me. And Ecclesiastes 4:8-10 is what I really think kind of sums up the whole sometimes you can't make it on your own, which basically reads, there was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom I am toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Right there, it kind of entails both having friends and, having the Lord and not spending so much time here on earth constantly worrying about, material possession and your status and everything else. But, another place, I think a few verses later, it talks about the strand of two is easily broken, but the strand of three is much stronger, meaning that if the Lord's relationship is in there, two believers together have God in between them as well, and how tight and how strong that bond is. And so to me, that's really a lot of what this song's talking about is we need each other, and we were created that way.
There's a couple other stories I think that can be, referenced in the Bible that are very relatable to this song that I kind of thought of. And I think one of the first is just the prodigal son story, where he goes off and kind of squanders all of his wealth. And then he comes back and, after he realizes kind of all the things he's kind of done to mess up, his father welcomes him with open arms. It's not, stay away from our family, like, because you ran off, you're not allowed back in. First of all, I think that's just the perfect example of God's grace in a parable. And then I think it just shows that that the son realized that he couldn't make it on his own. He was just like, I can't do this, and I've messed up and I haven't listened. And he goes back to kind of the place where he grew up. That's kind of the story that I think is really fascinating to me, how that kind of stood out to me with this song. And then another one is the parable of the Good Samaritan, where the Levite and the priest both walk by, and those were supposed to be the people that were supposed to help the wounded man.
Right.
And of all the people, it's the Good Samaritan that has this empathy where, he walks over. As soon as he sees him, he's like, let me help you. And I think, I think that teaches just this beautiful lesson of empathy and imagining, like, if I were in your shoes, what would I want somebody else to do? I think in today's world, people are still searching for the same empathy. I think it's a lot of people struggle with having empathy for one another, but I think the world would be a lot better for it.
Well, and you're right. I think what we're seeing play out right now in the nation, and I'm sure this goes on in other nations too. I'm sure it's not just our unique problem, but if we could just find that unifying spirit in us all that we were created to actually be, and walk that together instead of being so willing to tear each other apart, I just feel like we'd be in a much better scenario. And I guess what really kind of bugs me sometimes is, I've sat down with people that we wouldn't agree on much, but when we start to talk, we find that we agree on a lot more than we thought we did.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I'm sure you found the same, especially in a city like Nashville where there's so many people, you probably come into contact with a lot of people. You know, I've kind of found that the more you talk and the more personable you are, the more you find out that, oh, I do like people.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. And I think it's really easy to, you know, kind of distance yourself from obviously the people that, you know, don't agree with the same things that you agree with. But ultimately, it's amazing what a conversation does in person as compared to something that gets misconstrued online. And it's just unfortunate because, like, how much more peaceful would the world be, and how would our perceptions change of one another if the conversations we had, even though they are difficult, you know, made us stronger as a community and as a nation and as a world, really.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely believe that's true. You know, and you know, being down here in Florida, you know, it's not really a place that I ever really expected to live, to be quite honest, but it's quite a melting pot, you know. It's pretty much little New York, so to speak. Right. You know, a lot of snowbirds and everything else come down this way, and and it's interesting because, you know, we really do have to kind of learn to live and get along a little differently because we're so, you know, different culturally, and even the way they drive down here, it's like, you know, it's like combining New York City, Louisville, Kentucky, Atlanta, Georgia, and all those places you drive through those areas and you know that, I buckle up and brace for impact in Atlanta and Nashville, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
And you're getting all those different styles in one area right here. So it's interesting. The last point that I was really kind of wanting to talk a little bit about, and I think you've had to do this in your lifetime, in your career too, is really just looking at music as a vessel and, you know, a form of communication, and not necessarily looking at the genre or thinking about it only from the scope of one genre, which I was really bad about. I mean, I grew up as a metalhead, and every other piece of music, it was like, oh, I don't want to listen to that, you know?
Yeah.
And the older I've gotten, the more I've appreciated, you know, pretty much every form of music in some form or fashion. I may not listen to it or enjoy certain parts of it, but I can appreciate it and I can see where those musicians are coming from. And I know you have some bluegrass background in your family too. So, you know, I'd like to hear what that means to you, you know, what different styles of music. You know?
Definitely. Well, like I said, my uncle plays the banjo and my dad plays the bass, and he'll play the guitar as well. But they're in a little bluegrass band, and they play at little festivals in our small towns, and they'll play at nursing homes and whatnot. And really just, it's bluegrass is such a communal genre of music. I mean, any genre of music is communal, but I think the thing that sticks out to me about bluegrass is that it reminds me personally so much of home, just because of how natural it is, and how they speak of family and how they speak of land, and just the way that they imagine, you know, the world. And it's always, you know, I think the banjo itself is just such an interesting instrument. And
it's almost a percussion and a stringed instrument, sort of. Isn't it?
I don't think you can make a banjo sound too sad. You know, like, you know, I think that's the cool thing about some of these instruments, is that, like, you play a mandolin, you play a banjo, those instruments are supposed to make you happy, you know? Which I think is just fascinating. I think that's the point of bluegrass, is it's just a very settling genre, I guess would be a word to use. And so that's always been, and now that I'm down in Nashville, it's like I never hear the end of it, right? It's like there's obviously new country, and that's kind of the prime genre down here, but you still get your bluegrass every now and then.
Well, in country now, I mean, to me, that's almost rock in some ways.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
It's still there's still a country singer and some twang to it, but ever since Garth Brooks, there's been a lot more Kiss and country than there used to be.
Yes, yeah, a lot more. I think there's a lot more drums, and, you know, I think the tempo is sped up. So you kind of have your rock country, you have your pop country, which, you know, I think there's good to all of that. I think there's some people who are, like, totally, like, anti-pop country or anti, like, you know, certain types of country. But I'm like, at the end of the day, it goes back to your point, you know, like, you don't have to love it. You don't have to listen to it all the time, but you do have to have an admiration for the creativity process behind it all.
Yeah. And it's like, what makes you feel good, you know? Well, you know.
exactly. What's going to make you feel good is not always going to be what makes me feel good when it comes to music. Right. I've probably listened to a handful of metal songs in my life.
So the hits, Crazy Train and stuff like that, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
The stuff that you're forced to hear at sporting events.
Yeah, my buddy was a big Creed guy growing up, and so he always talks about some of these Creed songs, and I just shake my head. So I'm like, I can't believe you were such a Creed fan growing up. But again, that just goes back to the fact that I did not grow up on Creed. I grew up on Buddy Holly and people like Jack Johnson.
Which is so cool though for a guy your age to know even who those guys were.
Yeah. I just have a vivid memory. And again, it goes, my dad is such a mentor for me. Mm-hmm. And has been such a good counselor in life, but I just have like these memories of, we moved into this house and he was painting the walls and he was listening to Buddy Holly. And that was my first memory of hearing Buddy Holly. And I was like, gosh, this guy's really great. And, it's unfortunate because, imagine the potential he could have had.
Oh yeah.
Down the line, and it just, it's such a bummer because you think of people like that just could have had such a greater impact than they already had in the world. And,
and the audience wouldn't know this, but your dad would play Buddy Holly all the time.
Oh, that's right.
At campfires and stuff.
That's right. Maybe I got a video of him last year playing it. Maybe we could substitute our faces for like a minute.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it was, not until I saw Gary Busey playing Buddy Holly in a movie did I have any idea who this guy was. And then I'm like, holy mackerel, this is what Bruce has been doing all these years.
Oh yeah. Yep. He's been practicing the Buddy Holly impersonation. That's right. I think he would, how they have those Beatle bands that go around and kind of replicate the Beatles and dress up like them. I think my dad would do a good job of that, but for Buddy Holly instead.
Well, and there was this other guy by the name of Scott Hines that I don't think you ever got to meet, but he would be Elvis and your dad would be Buddy Holly, and the two of them would go back and forth, and it was just hilarious. So.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Oh, it was great. It was great. So, well, man, I mean, this has been great. It's been really good to kind of, talk a little bit about this song and talk about what it means for, just humanity in general. One of the things that really kind of bugs me sometimes about our faith and about our walk is I've heard many Christians say that, in the Bible, when it talks about they will know we are Christians by our love and things like that, it's like our love for one another as Christians. And it's like, no, it's our love for the world. It's our love for everybody.
Right.
And so, I think that's a lot of what this song's pointing at too, is like, look, man, be there for your neighbor, be there for the person that be the good Samaritan in somebody's life. If you see them struggling, be willing to step out on a limb and help them out. And Christ didn't walk up to people and he was like, hey, you got to believe in me and I'll help you out,
Yeah, no, right.
Yeah, I mean, in most cases, he provided before he even touched on anything else. He healed them or whatever, first. So go ahead.
I think that just speaks to just what the purpose of Christianity is anyways. I think it's about not, coming up with this necessarily a prideful attitude of like, oh, look at me, I'm a Christian, and look at you, you're not. It's not like, I think there's a beauty in approaching somebody that may be a non-believer, being a good representation of Christianity just by asking, how can I help? Not in necessarily a spiritual sense initially, but more just how can I help you advance in life? And then through our actions and through our words, slowly start to bring them to the Lord. And I'm so guilty of that. And like, there's days where I just am not about it. And, so many Christians are like that too. We have good days and bad days. But I think at the end of the day, as long as we're trying to set a good example, with our actions, I think that's ultimately what people are drawn to when it comes to, being a good Christian.
Yeah. Well, and I think you touched on something really good there, because for me, it's like, look, I'm a Christian, and that doesn't mean I'm better than anybody else. That means I'm broken and I know it.
Yeah.
And there's a higher authority that created me. And when he did that, he also gave me access to salvation and a gift to know life and know life to its fullest. That's what, in a nutshell, it means to me. And if anything else, when I love on everybody else, I just want them to know what I know, and not be combative or smear it in somebody's face, but say, hey, I feel like this is a better way that I've found, and I want you to know about it. So,
yeah. And I to add to kind of what we're both saying, I had a conversation with a buddy of mine actually a couple of buddies of mine, and a week's worth of time over the phone for about an hour. And we were just kind of talking about, stuff that we were struggling with. And, one of my buddies asked me, he's like, cause I'm such I struggle a lot with perfectionism. Mm-hmm. And whenever I slip up on one thing, I'm like, oh, I'm just like, I'm so unworthy. And I think that's part of the reason why I've struggled a lot in my faith recently, is just because I don't, I'm like, oh, I can't do this perfectly. So why? Like, I just can't. Sometimes I'm just really bad at accepting grace from the Lord and from other people. It's like, oh, I don't deserve this. So like, I almost, punish myself. And so, but yeah, he was asking me, he's like, if you were to die today, sorry, this is kind of getting a little too personal, but he's like, if you were to die today, do you think you would go to heaven or hell? And, my personal response was like, all I could think of was like the bad things I've done. And it's interesting to me because I don't think that's what other people see you as. They see you as the good things that you've done. And I think most of the time the good outweighs the bad. And to me, that was a really eye-opening experience, because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm just such a pessimist when it comes to my life. And I'm such a perfectionist when it comes to my life, that if I don't do something right, all the good that I've done just goes out the window, and it's just me focusing on the bad. And so, yeah, I think that's just been one of the biggest struggles for me, is just like, how do I not be a perfectionist, and how do I give grace to myself and give grace to others? Because I think we're better at giving grace to others than we are giving it to ourselves a lot of times.
Definitely.
Which is unfortunate, because I think that causes us to kind of see ourselves in a worse image, and leads to depression and all these different struggles. And I think that's an unfortunate thing that's going on in the world right now, whether you're a Christian or not, is just, depression and all of that. But yeah, I thought that was just a really interesting point that he had made. He's like, just people view you so much better than you view yourself. And I think it's really important to carry that along with you as you go into the world, try to be a better individual.
And you're right. And I think a good portion of growing in faith and staying in the Word, praying, and surrounding yourself, like this whole episode's really talked about, with others, a good portion of that leads you to see His grace and His mercy a little clearer, because, I mean, that's really what it's about. And if we can't grasp that for our own selves, then it's really tough for us to grasp it for everybody else as well,
Right.
So, but man, this has been great. I really hate to wrap it up, but we got time constraints.
That's right.
Right. So this is Rockin' Odd Todd signing off. We want to thank Clay Hatton for his appearance on this show. And Clay, we're going to be doing some more talking. I guarantee that the further your career goes along, we're going to want to hear more from you. You take care, man.
Yeah. Hey, thanks so much, Todd. I really appreciate it. Great to see you.
All right. Well, that concludes this episode of the Song and Verse podcast. We'll catch you next time.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Song and Verse podcast. Hopefully it was an uplifting, honest, and meaningful experience for you. We do accept donations. If you feel led to give to the Song and Verse Ministries, check out songandverseministries.com/donate for a number of different ways to give back. And also be sure to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest. We hope you tune in to the next episode of the Song and Verse podcast. Until then, keep searching for the DNA of God's Word found flowing through song.